In the golden era of WWF, when villains were larger than life and every arena erupted with genuine hatred, certain wrestlers stood above the rest as the company's most dangerous threats. These were the master manipulators who had crowds eating out of their hands, the silver-tongued devils whose mere presence could shift an arena's energy, the perfect foils who elevated every babyface they faced. Today we uncover the mysterious fates of WWF's most legendary heels, superstars who had the entire wrestling world in their grip but mysteriously disappeared when the spotlight moved on. First up, Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was one of the most hated wrestlers in history. He could make entire arenas want to kill him just by walking to the ring in his kilt with bagpipes. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Despite being the biggest heel in wrestling during the 1980s boom, he never once held the WWF Championship, not even for a day. This wasn't an accident. There were backstage politics, power plays, and decisions made in boardrooms that kept the belt away from wrestling's most compelling villain. What turns a 13-year-old kid into one of wrestling's most feared villains? For Roderick George Toombs, the answer started in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where his childhood was anything but normal. His father, Stanley Baird Toombs, worked for the Canadian National Railway Police, but that badge and uniform couldn't protect young Roderick from the chaos at home. The family moved constantly across Canada as his father's job demanded transfers from one posting to another. By the time he was a teenager, Roderick had been constantly relocated between many schools. School became a battlefield for him. He didn't fit in anywhere, and he didn't want to. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker. Other kids saw him as the weird new guy who would probably be gone in a few months anyway. He got into fights regularly, and his grades suffered. The constant moving meant he never formed lasting friendships or learned how to trust people. At 13 years old, he was expelled from school for carrying a switchblade. That was the moment his childhood officially ended. His father kicked him out of the house after the expulsion. Roderick found himself living in youth hostels across Western Canada, bouncing from one city to another with nothing but the clothes on his back. He slept in train stations, under bridges, and anywhere else he could find shelter. He learned fast how to survive on the streets, dumpster diving for food and panhandling for change. Some nights he went to bed hungry. The anger that would later make him famous started building during those months on the street. Every day was about survival. Every person he met might try to take advantage of him or hurt him. He developed a hard edge that most people don't get until they're adults, if they ever get it at all. The pain wasn't just physical from sleeping rough or going without food. It was the emotional pain of being abandoned by his own family when he needed them most. Boxing gyms became his refuge during this period. He discovered he had natural fighting ability and trainers who were willing to work with him. The discipline of boxing gave him structure that had been missing from his life. He claimed amateur boxing success, including golden gloves in interviews. A claim often repeated but not confirmed in tournament lists. He also trained in judo, learning grappling techniques that would serve him well later. These weren't hobbies for him, like they might be for other teenagers. These were survival skills. His first wrestling experiences came when he was still a teenager, training in Canada and working with promoters like Al Tomko. His early AWA work put him in the ring opposite veterans like Larry Hennig, and he later worked with trainers including Gene LeBell and Leo Garibaldi. These mentors saw something in the angry young man that others might have missed. Roderick had legitimate fighting skills from his boxing and judo training, but more than that, he had an authenticity that most wrestlers spend years trying to fake. When he got angry in the ring, it wasn't an act. The other wrestlers noticed this right away. Most guys who came into wrestling had to learn how to make their emotions bigger and more dramatic for the crowd. Roderick's problem was the opposite. He had to learn how to control his real anger so it didn't get him arrested or banned from arenas. His early matches were raw and sometimes dangerous because he hadn't learned how to work safely with opponents while still maintaining that edge that made him special. His experiences sleeping rough had taught him how to read people quickly and accurately. He could spot weakness or fear in opponents before they even knew they were showing it. He learned how to use psychological warfare as effectively as any physical move. The other wrestlers were often older and more experienced, but most of them had never faced genuine hardship like he had. They were playing tough guys. He actually was one. What made him different from other wrestlers with hard backgrounds was his intelligence. He wasn't just a street tough who could throw punches. He studied how crowds reacted to different things he said or did. He watched other wrestlers' promos and matches, learning what worked and what didn't. He began to understand that his real-life pain and anger could be his greatest weapons if he learned how to channel them properly. During his youth, he had also learned to play bagpipes, a skill that seemed unrelated to wrestling at the time. But like everything else from his difficult past, it would eventually become part of his arsenal. The authenticity that came from his brutal upbringing became his calling card. When he cut promos talking about being tough or surviving hard times, every word carried weight because audiences could sense he had lived it. His difficult childhood wasn't just backstory for his wrestling character. It was the foundation that everything else would be built on. The anger, the survival instincts, the ability to read people and situations quickly, the legitimate fighting skills, and most importantly, the authentic edge that made audiences uncomfortable. He had all the raw materials needed to become wrestling's most hated villain. But having the tools and knowing how to use them were two different things entirely. Portland Wrestling became the laboratory where Piper built his villain act. Promoter Don Owen ran the Pacific Northwest Territory with a tight ship, but gave wrestlers freedom to experiment with their characters as long as they could generate heat. Piper found himself in the perfect environment for learning what made people truly angry. The first thing he discovered was that being genuinely disliked was actually a valuable skill in wrestling. Most wrestlers spent their careers trying to get fans to cheer for them, but someone had to be the bad guy, and there was serious money in making people hate you. The more they hated you, the more they would pay to see you lose. It was backwards logic that made perfect sense in the wrestling business. His breakthrough came when he started incorporating his Scottish heritage into his character. He began wearing kilts to the ring and playing bagpipes during his entrance. The crowd reaction was immediate and violent. Fans in Portland didn't just boo him. They threw things at him. They screamed death threats. They tried to climb over the guardrails to get at him. The bagpipes were particularly effective because the sound was so annoying that it made people angry before he even started wrestling. The kilt and bagpipes weren't just costumes and props. He turned them into weapons for psychological warfare. He used the bagpipes as purposeful provocation, part of his routine to rile crowds. He used the kilt and staged gestures to push conservative crowds past their breaking point. Every detail was calculated to make people uncomfortable and angry. He watched other wrestlers' promos and learned the psychology of crowd manipulation. Some wrestlers tried to be scary, others tried to be arrogant. Piper realized that the most effective approach was to be genuinely irritating. He developed a speaking style that was part Scottish accent, part street smart punk, and completely annoying. His voice had a nasal quality that cut through arena noise and got under people's skin. His tag team partnership with Rick Martel gave him a chance to learn from a technically superior wrestler while developing his character work. Martel was a gifted athlete who could make anyone look good in the ring. Working with him taught Piper how to pace a match and build drama. They won multiple Pacific Northwest Tag Team Championships together, establishing Piper's credibility as both a performer and a draw. The success was always secondary to the reaction they generated. Crowds would get so worked up during their matches that security had to be increased. Fans would wait outside the arena after shows, hoping to confront them. The local newspapers started writing about the wrestlers as if they were real criminals, rather than entertainers. Portland Wrestling became his laboratory for testing what made audiences truly angry. He tried different approaches in different towns to see what generated the strongest reactions. In some places, insulting local sports teams worked best. In others, making fun of local politicians got bigger heat. He learned that the key was finding whatever people cared about most and then attacking it without mercy. His mic work during this period was fearless in ways that shocked even other wrestlers. Most heels would insult the crowd in generic ways. Piper would get specific and personal. He would research local news stories and work them into his promos. He would make fun of local tragedies or economic problems. Other wrestlers thought he was taking things too far, but the crowds proved them wrong with their passionate hatred. Wrestling magazines started writing about him as one of the most hated wrestlers in the country. Other promoters began calling Don Owen to ask about booking him for their territories. His reputation for generating genuine heat was spreading beyond the Pacific Northwest. Wrestlers from other regions would visit Portland shows just to watch him work and try to figure out what made him so effective. He was creating something entirely new in wrestling. Most heels relied on standard tactics, like cheating or making fun of local sports teams. Piper had developed a character that was so thoroughly irritating and offensive that audiences forgot they were watching entertainment. They genuinely wanted to hurt him. That level of emotional investment was exactly what wrestling promoters were looking for. The other wrestlers backstage started treating him differently. Some were jealous of the attention he was getting. Others were genuinely impressed by his ability to manipulate crowds. A few were actually afraid of him because they weren't sure where the character ended and the real person began. His reputation for unpredictability became part of his appeal to promoters who wanted something different from their main event heels. Portland wasn't just where Piper learned to wrestle. It was where he learned to weaponize hatred and turn it into the most valuable commodity in professional wrestling. But his education in villainy was about to take a much more dangerous turn. The skills he had perfected in the Pacific Northwest were about to be tested in ways that would leave permanent scars. His next challenge came in Jim Crockett Promotions, where the competition was tougher and the stakes higher than anything he had experienced in Portland. This was serious wrestling territory with television coverage that reached millions of homes across the southeastern United States. His arrival in Mid-Atlantic wrestling put him directly in the path of Greg the Hammer Valentine, already established as one of the territory's top heels with legitimate amateur wrestling credentials and wrestling royalty bloodlines as Johnny Valentine's son. Their rivalry started over the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. Valentine held the title and saw Piper as an upstart from the Northwest who didn't belong in his territory. Piper saw Valentine as everything he hated about wrestling establishment figures who thought they were better than street fighters like him. Neither man was willing to show weakness or give ground to the other. Their matches became increasingly violent as each tried to prove he was tougher than his opponent. The feud escalated when Valentine injured Piper's ear during one of their encounters. He used a move that drove his elbow directly into Piper's ear with unusual force. The injury was real and serious, causing immediate pain and hearing problems. But instead of backing down or taking time off to heal, Piper used the injury to fuel his anger and make their rivalry even more personal. He started cutting promos about how Valentine was trying to end his career and destroy his livelihood. Valentine played his part perfectly, claiming that he was going to finish what he started and put Piper out of wrestling permanently. He would target the injured ear during every match, applying submission holds that put pressure on the damaged area. The crowds could see that Piper was in genuine pain, which made them more invested in seeing him get revenge. This wasn't fake wrestling drama. This was real violence being used to sell tickets. The build-up to the dog collar match at the first Starrcade in 1983 was unlike anything wrestling had seen before. Both men would be connected by a steel chain attached to dog collars around their necks. There would be no escape and no way to avoid punishment. The match was designed to be the final chapter in their brutal rivalry. Wrestling fans across the country knew they were about to witness something special and violent. The dog collar match itself lived up to every bit of hype that surrounded it. Connected by the chain, both men used it as a weapon to choke and beat each other. They fought all over the arena, not just in the ring. The chain left marks on both wrestlers as they used it to slam each other into ring posts and barriers. Blood flowed freely as the match turned into something that looked more like a real fight than sports entertainment. During the match, Valentine broke Piper's eardrum. The trauma from the chain and Valentine's continued targeting of the area caused permanent damage that would affect his hearing for the rest of his life. Piper later lost roughly 50 to 75% of his hearing in that ear. This wasn't a storyline injury that would heal after a few weeks. This was real damage that he would carry with him forever. Instead of ending his career, the injury became part of his legend. Wrestling fans and other wrestlers saw what he was willing to sacrifice for his craft. The ear injury proved that his toughness wasn't just an act or part of his character. He was genuinely willing to risk permanent physical damage to put on a show for the fans. This reputation for real toughness made other wrestlers respect him and fear him at the same time. His wars with Ric Flair during this period showed another side of his abilities. Flair was the complete opposite of Valentine, a technical wrestler who relied on psychology and showmanship rather than pure violence. Working with Flair taught Piper how to adjust his style to different opponents while maintaining his edge. When Piper beat Ric Flair for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, it established him as a main event player in one of wrestling's most competitive territories. He defended the title against top wrestlers from across the country and proved he could carry a major championship. These matches elevated him from regional star to national sensation. Wrestling magazines started featuring him on covers. Other territories began making offers to book him for their biggest shows. His reputation for generating heat and delivering in big matches made him one of the most sought-after wrestlers in the country. The ear injury proved Piper would sacrifice his body for his craft, and it made him more dangerous than ever. His willingness to work through real pain and injury showed a level of dedication that impressed even his harshest critics backstage. This reputation for authentic toughness caught the attention of Vince McMahon, who was always looking for wrestlers who could handle the pressures of national television and create moments that would shock audiences beyond anything they had seen before. McMahon found exactly what he was looking for when he signed Piper to the WWE in 1984. Television was becoming crucial to wrestling success, and McMahon needed programming that would keep audiences watching between matches. He created Piper's Pit as a talk show segment where Piper would interview wrestlers and celebrities in a cheap studio setting with fake plants and a cheesy backdrop. Piper was perfect for hosting because his natural ability to irritate people could turn any interview into a confrontation within minutes. The segment launched without much fanfare, but McMahon knew they needed a moment that would shock audiences and create mainstream attention. Wrestling was trying to break into popular culture beyond just wrestling fans. The setup came when Jimmy Snuka was booked as a guest. Snuka was one of the most popular wrestlers in the company, a high-flying performer from the Pacific Islands. Piper arrived at the studio with a bag of coconuts as props, telling the production crew he was going to demonstrate the hardness of Snuka's head by smashing them. Everyone assumed this was typical Piper showboating. The cameras started rolling, and Piper began making insulting comments about Snuka's background and intelligence. He started smashing coconuts with his bare hands, making jokes about how they reminded him of Snuka's head. The audience was already uncomfortable with the racial undertones, but then Piper grabbed one of the broken coconut pieces and smashed it directly into Snuka's skull. Snuka went down like he had been hit with a baseball bat. Blood started flowing from his head immediately. The attack looked completely real because in many ways it was. Piper had used a real coconut as a weapon and caused genuine injury. The studio audience went silent before erupting in boos and screams. Some people tried to rush the set to help Snuka or attack Piper. The aftermath generated more heat than most wrestlers created in their entire careers. Wrestling fans were outraged by the apparent brutality and racism of the attack. Mainstream media picked up the story as an example of how violent and offensive wrestling had become. The WWE received hundreds of angry phone calls and letters demanding that Piper be fired or arrested. But the controversy was exactly what the WWE needed. The coconut incident became the most talked about moment in wrestling that year. It established Piper's Pit as must-see television and proved that the WWE could create moments that transcended the wrestling audience. Every wrestling fan in the country wanted to see what Piper would do next. Piper's Pit became the template for all future wrestling talk show segments, influencing later shows like Chris Jericho's Highlight Reel and The Miz's Miz TV. Other promotions started creating their own interview segments hosted by heel wrestlers. The format of having a controversial host interview guests in a setting designed to create conflict became a standard part of wrestling television. Other memorable moments on the show kept audiences coming back week after week. Piper would insult local sports teams, make fun of other wrestlers' personal lives, and create situations that led to brawls and destruction of the set. Each segment was designed to advance storylines while generating maximum heat for upcoming matches. The segment elevated both Piper and his guests to new levels of fame within the wrestling industry. Wrestlers who appeared on Piper's Pit automatically became more important in fans' minds. Being chosen as a guest was seen as a sign that the company had big plans for a wrestler. The show gave wrestlers a platform to build their characters through confrontations and interviews, rather than just in-ring action. Piper's ability to generate controversy and mainstream attention made him invaluable to McMahon's expansion plans. His talk show segment proved that wrestling could create compelling television content beyond just matches. The format allowed for character development and storyline advancement in ways that traditional wrestling programming couldn't match. The success of Piper's Pit demonstrated that Piper wasn't just a wrestler who could work matches. He was an entertainer who could carry television programming and generate the kind of mainstream buzz that McMahon needed for his national expansion. His natural charisma and ability to create controversy made him perfect for the bigger stage that wrestling was about to enter. The coconut incident and the ongoing success of Piper's Pit established him as one of wrestling's most valuable performers. He had proven he could generate heat, carry television segments, and create moments that people would never forget. His villainous charisma was becoming essential to the WWE's plans for something much bigger than anyone in wrestling had ever attempted before. WrestleMania 1 was a make-or-break moment for Vince McMahon's national expansion plan, and it all depended on whether people would pay to see Piper lose. By 1985, McMahon had spent millions of dollars buying out regional promoters, signing their biggest stars, and putting everything on cable television. But the whole scheme would collapse if he couldn't prove that wrestling could draw mainstream audiences willing to pay premium prices for live events. The WWE's national expansion strategy was built around the rock and wrestling connection with MTV. McMahon understood that wrestling needed to break out of its traditional audience to survive. MTV was the perfect partner because it reached exactly the demographic he wanted: young people with disposable income who weren't already wrestling fans. The music television network was looking for programming that would generate controversy and keep viewers watching. Wrestling provided both. The entire future of wrestling hinged on the success of the first WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden. McMahon had invested everything he owned and borrowed millions more to finance the event. If it failed, he would lose his company and probably go bankrupt. Other wrestling promoters around the country were watching and hoping he would fail, so they could keep their territories safe from his expansion. The pressure was enormous. Piper's central role in the main event alongside Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T made him the key to the whole operation. The match was designed around celebrity involvement to attract mainstream media attention. Mr. T was one of the biggest stars in entertainment at the time because of the A-Team television show. But having celebrities in wrestling matches was risky because they couldn't actually wrestle and might embarrass everyone involved. His feud with Hogan had been building for months through Piper's Pit segments and other WWE programming. The war to settle the score aired on MTV and helped build the Hogan-Piper storyline before WrestleMania, drawing huge ratings and proving wrestling could succeed on cable television. Hogan was the all-American hero, Piper was the abrasive antagonist, a contrast MTV-friendly mainstream audiences could easily pick sides on. The involvement with celebrities brought mainstream credibility that wrestling had never experienced before. Mr. T's participation meant that major entertainment media had to cover WrestleMania as a legitimate news story. Television shows, newspapers, and magazines that normally ignored wrestling were forced to write about it because one of their biggest stars was involved. This coverage reached millions of people who had never watched a wrestling match. The massive media attention that Piper helped generate went beyond anything wrestling had achieved before. He appeared on talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, and became the face of wrestling's villain side for mainstream audiences. His ability to play the perfect bad guy in interviews made journalists want to write about him because he gave them controversial quotes that would attract readers. Celebrity involvement expanded beyond just the main event participants. Muhammad Ali served as the special guest referee, adding even more mainstream star power to the event. Cyndi Lauper was involved in other storylines on the card. The combination of wrestling stars and entertainment celebrities created a spectacle that attracted attention from people who normally wouldn't care about professional wrestling. His heel work made Hogan look like an even bigger hero to casual fans who were watching wrestling for the first time. Piper's job was to be so thoroughly unlikable that anyone opposing him would automatically become the good guy. He insulted American values, made fun of popular culture, and acted like everything decent people believed in was stupid. This made Hogan's victory even more satisfying for audiences. Other crossover moments during this period included appearances by wrestlers on MTV programming and music videos featuring wrestling storylines. The partnership between WWE and MTV created a cultural phenomenon that made wrestling cool for teenagers and young adults who had never watched it before. Piper was central to many of these crossover moments because his character was easy for non-wrestling fans to understand and hate. The success of WrestleMania changed wrestling forever by proving that the business could attract mainstream audiences and generate massive revenue from pay-per-view events. The event sold out Madison Square Garden and drew significant closed-circuit television audiences around the country. More importantly, it established wrestling as legitimate entertainment that could compete with other major sporting events for audience attention and media coverage. Piper's villainous charisma didn't just help WrestleMania succeed. It created the template for wrestling's mainstream future, where controversial characters and celebrity involvement would become standard elements of major events. His work as the primary antagonist proved that wrestling needed great villains, just as much as it needed heroic champions. But despite headlining the event that launched wrestling into the mainstream and proving himself as one of the industry's biggest draws, something was missing from Piper's resume that should have been automatic for a star of his magnitude. The WWE Championship remained out of reach, despite every indication that Piper had earned it. By 1986, he had proven himself as the most effective heel in wrestling history. He had main-evented WrestleMania, revolutionized wrestling television, and generated more heat than any wrestler of his generation. Fans packed arenas specifically to see him lose. His merchandise sold despite him being the villain. Every metric that mattered in wrestling showed he was ready for a championship run. But the WWE Championship never came. This wasn't an oversight or booking mistake. Piper never held the WWE Championship during his peak years in the 1980s, creating one of wrestling's most notable anomalies. Despite his massive popularity and proven drawing power, the title remained off-limits. The decision came from the top of the company and reflected backstage considerations that had nothing to do with his ability or fan support. Wrestling insiders knew something was happening behind the scenes that kept the title away from one of the company's biggest stars. 3 documented factors likely contributed to keeping the championship away from Piper. First, Vince McMahon's booking philosophy centered around having controllable, media-friendly champions who could represent the company in mainstream appearances. Hulk Hogan was perfect for this role because he stayed in character, followed company guidelines, and never created controversy outside of scripted storylines. He was reliable and predictable in ways that made McMahon comfortable, putting him in front of corporate sponsors and television executives. Second, concerns about Piper's unpredictable nature and outspoken behavior created problems for McMahon's vision of mainstream success. Piper had a reputation for speaking his mind, regardless of company policy or political considerations. He would go off script during interviews and create situations that made corporate partners nervous. His later controversies, including an HBO interview that WWE used as cause for his release in 2003, demonstrated the kind of unpredictable behavior that made him risky as a flagship champion. Third, occasional behind-the-scenes conflicts reinforced McMahon's reluctance to give Piper more power within the company. Reports and backstage accounts indicate that Piper's independent streak and willingness to challenge authority created tension. McMahon valued loyalty and predictability in his champions. He wanted wrestlers who would follow company direction without question and represent the WWE according to his vision. The company's expansion into mainstream entertainment required champions who could appear on talk shows and corporate events without creating controversy. Piper's interview style was designed to generate heat and make people angry. This worked perfectly for building wrestling storylines, but it could backfire in mainstream media appearances where controversy might hurt business relationships. McMahon needed champions who could turn the heel act off when representing the company outside wrestling contexts. However, the championship snub wasn't universal across promotions. Piper did hold other meaningful titles that demonstrated he was trusted with major belts elsewhere. He won NWA United States Championships during his time in Jim Crockett Promotions and later captured the Intercontinental Championship in 1992. His multiple United States title reigns in JCP and WCW showed that other promoters saw him as championship material. This adds nuance to the snub narrative and suggests the issue was specific to McMahon's vision for the WWE's top prize. Other wrestlers and industry insiders viewed the obvious snub as evidence of backstage politics that had nothing to do with wrestling ability. Veterans who worked with both Hogan and Piper knew that Piper was just as capable of carrying the company as champion. His matches drew money and his storylines kept fans interested. The fact that he never got the opportunity, despite his obvious qualifications, created resentment among wrestlers who felt politics trumped merit. Wrestling journalists and industry observers began writing about the championship snub as an example of how business considerations sometimes overrode wrestling logic. Fans started questioning why their favorite heel never got rewarded with title runs, despite being more entertaining than many champions. The situation became an open secret within wrestling circles that McMahon's booking decisions were influenced by factors beyond just drawing power and fan reaction. Business considerations ultimately outweighed wrestling merit in championship decisions. The WWE was trying to become a mainstream entertainment company that could attract corporate sponsors and television deals. Having an unpredictable champion who might say something controversial could jeopardize these business relationships. McMahon chose safety over excitement when it came to his top championship. Piper's championship snub revealed the politics behind wrestling's biggest prize. The championship went to wrestlers who fit McMahon's vision of what a champion should be, rather than who fans most wanted to see win it. This policy showed how business considerations could override wrestling logic, even when it meant leaving money on the table. His success would have to come from other areas of entertainment, where his unpredictable nature might be seen as an asset rather than a liability. Hollywood became the proving ground where Piper's unpredictable nature finally paid off. Most wrestlers who try acting end up embarrassing themselves. Piper became a cult icon. By the late 1980s, his wrestling career had reached its peak, but the championship snub left him looking for new challenges. Hollywood offered an opportunity to prove his talents extended beyond the wrestling ring. Most wrestlers who made the transition to movies failed spectacularly, becoming punchlines rather than legitimate actors. The entertainment industry viewed wrestlers as muscle-bound performers who couldn't handle real acting demands. Director John Carpenter was working on a science fiction film called They Live and needed someone who could convincingly play a blue-collar drifter who discovers an alien conspiracy. The role required an actor who looked tough enough to be believable as a construction worker, but could also handle dialogue and carry dramatic scenes. Carpenter had seen Piper's work on television and thought his natural intensity might translate well to film. Wrestling fans and movie critics both expected him to fail as an actor when news of his casting broke. Wrestling had a terrible reputation in Hollywood circles. Movie executives saw wrestlers as cartoon characters who couldn't handle serious dramatic work. Critics assumed They Live would be another cheaply made action movie designed to capitalize on wrestling's popularity without any real artistic merit. His preparation for the role surprised everyone involved in the production. He approached acting with the same dedication he brought to wrestling, studying his character's background and motivations. He worked with acting coaches to improve his delivery and learn film techniques that were different from wrestling promos. The other actors on set were impressed by how seriously he took the craft and how willing he was to take direction. They Live was released in 1988 and featured the famous line, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum." His character's declaration captured audiences' imagination and became one of the most quoted movie phrases of the decade. The line was delivered with perfect timing and showed he had natural comedic timing that nobody expected from his wrestling persona. They Live became a cult classic that elevated his profile beyond wrestling into mainstream entertainment culture. The movie's themes about media manipulation and hidden control structures resonated with audiences who saw it as commentary on American society. His performance as the working-class hero who fights against corporate conspiracy made him a legitimate action star. Critics who expected to dismiss his acting were forced to admit he had genuine screen presence and later acknowledged him as a cult icon. His other film work included Hell Comes to Frogtown and a string of B-movies and TV roles that turned him into a cult actor. He approached each project with the same professionalism he showed in They Live, building a resume that proved his acting success wasn't just luck. His natural charisma translated well to different types of entertainment, making him a valuable performer for various projects. He balanced his entertainment career with periodic returns to wrestling, using his Hollywood credentials to negotiate better deals and more creative control. His acting success raised his mainstream profile and gave him crossover credibility that helped him negotiate returns and shaped how promoters viewed him. Wrestling promoters who had previously dismissed him as just another wrestler now saw him as a legitimate entertainment personality with crossover appeal. Television work became a regular part of his schedule as producers discovered he could handle both dramatic and comedic roles. He appeared on popular shows as both guest star and recurring character, proving his acting range extended beyond action movies. His entertainment success changed how wrestling promoters viewed him when he made return appearances. Instead of being seen as just another wrestler looking for one more payday, he was now a proven entertainment commodity with value beyond wrestling. The success in Hollywood proved that wrestlers could be legitimate entertainers if they had the right combination of natural talent and professional dedication. Other wrestlers began following his path into acting, though few achieved his level of success. He had broken down barriers that existed between wrestling and mainstream entertainment, proving that athletic entertainers could succeed in other areas of show business. The Hollywood experience taught him new skills that he brought back to wrestling. His improved acting ability made his wrestling promos more convincing and entertaining. He understood camera angles and timing in ways that made his wrestling performances more polished. The crossover between his acting and wrestling careers created a synergy that benefited both. His success didn't just prove wrestlers could be legitimate entertainers. It opened doors for future wrestlers who wanted to expand beyond the ring into other areas of entertainment. He had created a template that others could follow, showing that wrestling could be a stepping stone to broader entertainment success rather than a dead-end career. But even with Hollywood success under his belt, Piper wasn't finished with wrestling. The ring kept calling him back for battles that would test more than just his acting skills. His later career became a battle against time and his own body's limitations. By the mid-1990s, Piper was approaching his 40s and decades of punishment were taking their toll. His knees ached from countless matches, his back hurt from taking bumps on concrete floors and steel chairs. The hearing loss from his ear injury years earlier was getting worse, but he wasn't ready to retire completely from the business that had made him famous. Age and health issues began affecting his ability to perform at his previous level when he signed with World Championship Wrestling in late 1996. WCW was trying to compete with the WWE by signing established stars who could draw television ratings and pay-per-view buys. Piper still had name recognition and the ability to cut promos that generated heat, but his in-ring work was noticeably slower than it had been during his prime years in the 1980s. His World Championship Wrestling run gave him opportunities that had been denied during his World Wrestling Entertainment peak. He debuted in late 1996, feuded with Hogan and the NWO, briefly served as on-air commissioner, and had several high-profile matches and angles through 1999 before leaving in 2000. The Monday Night Wars between WCW and WWE meant both companies were desperate for star power and willing to push older wrestlers in ways they might not have considered during normal circumstances. His feuds with Hulk Hogan took on new meaning in WCW because both men were older and their careers were winding down. Their matches lacked the athleticism of their younger days, but made up for it with storytelling and the history between the characters. Fans who had watched their rivalry in the WWE during the 1980s were interested in seeing how their story would continue in a different company with different circumstances. Piper beat Hogan in a non-title Starrcade main event, a big win on paper, but not an actual world title change. The victory came more than a decade after most people thought he deserved a major championship run. While he was past his physical prime, the high-profile win proved he could still draw money and generate interest from wrestling audiences. His role as WCW commissioner allowed him to stay involved in wrestling storylines without having to wrestle full-time matches that his body could no longer handle effectively. The position gave him authority over other wrestlers and let him use his promo skills to advance storylines and create television drama. It was a natural fit for someone who had always been better at talking than most wrestlers were at wrestling. His continued involvement in wrestling through mentoring younger wrestlers gave him purpose during his later years. He worked with wrestlers like Virgil and Sean O'Haire, who wanted to improve their promo skills and learn how to generate heat from audiences. His knowledge about psychology and crowd manipulation was valuable to wrestlers who had athletic ability, but lacked the verbal skills that had made him famous. Controversial moments and backstage incidents throughout his later career showed his uncompromising nature hadn't softened with age. His 2003 HBO interview created problems with WWE management, who cited the interview and concerns about self-destructive behavior as reasons for his release. He still spoke his mind about wrestling politics and wasn't afraid to criticize decisions made by promoters or other wrestlers. Some people in the wrestling business. Next up, the Honky Tonk Man. It's 1987, and Ricky Steamboat just lost the Intercontinental Championship to a guy dressed like Elvis who can barely wrestle. The crowd is going absolutely crazy, throwing garbage in the ring and booing so loud you can't hear the announcers. Wayne Farris had just pulled off one of wrestling's biggest upsets as the Honky Tonk Man. But what happened next turned him from a joke into wrestling's most hated heel. For the next 454 days, he would dodge, duck, and cheat his way through defenses, while fans begged to see anyone, literally anyone, take that title away from him. Wayne Farris grew up in Tennessee and entered wrestling in 1976, cutting his teeth across the Southern Territories. The pay was terrible and the work wasn't steady. You'd show up one day to work a show, the next day you might be driving to another town, and some weeks you wouldn't get booked at all. That's not exactly a career path that's going to make you rich. Wayne was born and raised in Tennessee, so he knew the area well. But knowing where you are and figuring out how to pay your bills are two different things. The guy was looking around for other options, and somehow he got this idea in his head that professional wrestling might be his answer. Now keep in mind, this was during the territory days when wrestling was still regional and guys were making their living driving from town to town, putting on shows. Most people who knew Wayne thought he was completely nuts for even considering wrestling. The guy wasn't exactly built like your typical wrestler. He didn't have the size of Hulk Hogan or the intimidating presence of Andre the Giant. Wayne was just a regular-looking dude from Tennessee who happened to think he could make it in a business full of giants and athletes. But here's the thing that nobody really picked up on at first. Wayne had this natural ability to get under people's skin. He started training under Herb Welch, who was part of the Welch-Fuller wrestling family. This connection would later create some bad blood with Jerry Lawler, Wayne's own cousin, but at the time it was his way into the business. Night after night, this guy would get his butt kicked by more experienced wrestlers who were teaching him the ropes. We're talking about real old-school training here, where you learned by taking bumps and getting thrown around the ring until you figured out how to protect yourself. The territory system was brutal for new guys. You'd drive hundreds of miles to work a show, maybe make 20 or 30 bucks if you were lucky, then drive to the next town to do it all over again. But Wayne was grinding through this system and learning something important about wrestling that would serve him well later on. Most guys who got into wrestling wanted to be the good guy. They wanted crowds to cheer for them and kids to ask for their autographs. Wayne figured out pretty early that there was money to be made on the other side of that equation. He started paying attention to how crowds reacted to the villains and noticed that sometimes the bad guys got bigger reactions than the heroes. The fans might be booing, but they were engaged and invested in seeing what happened next. Wayne began developing this understanding that being hated could actually be more valuable than being loved in wrestling. While other guys were trying to perfect their good guy personas, Wayne was experimenting with ways to make crowds genuinely dislike him. He was learning how to use his voice, his mannerisms, and his attitude to get heat from audiences. This wasn't just about being mean or aggressive, it was about being annoying in exactly the right way. The territory days taught him that wrestling wasn't just about athletic ability or looking the part. It was about making people care enough to buy tickets and come back next week to see what happened. Wayne was developing skills in crowd psychology that would eventually make him way more money than any regular job ever could have. He was figuring out how to read an audience and manipulate their emotions, which is really the heart of professional wrestling. So here's this guy from Tennessee slowly building up his reputation in small wrestling promotions across the South. He's taking bumps, learning the business, and most importantly, he's discovering that his ticket to success might be making fans absolutely hate his guts. This mindset was going to be the foundation for everything that came later. But Wayne needed to prove these skills worked in wrestling's most demanding territory, where the fans were brutal and they knew good wrestling from garbage. Memphis was where Wayne really had to prove himself. Jerry Lawler's Memphis territory wasn't some small-time operation where you could get away with being sloppy or unprofessional. This was one of the hottest wrestling territories in the entire country, and the fans there took their wrestling seriously. They'd seen every trick in the book, and they could spot a fake from a mile away. Working in Memphis meant going up against guys who'd been perfecting their craft for years. You had established stars, up-and-coming talent, and veterans who could make or break a newcomer's career. Wayne wasn't the most athletic guy on the roster, and he definitely wasn't the strongest. But he was paying attention to what worked and what didn't work with those Memphis crowds. The territory system meant Wayne was also working other areas around the South. He'd travel down to Florida and team up with Larry Latham as part of the Blonde Bombers tag team. On June 15, 1979, they won the Southern Tag Team Championship in Tupelo, Mississippi. But it was what happened after that match that really taught Wayne about crowd psychology. The Blonde Bombers got into this massive brawl at the concession stand that had fans throwing chairs and going absolutely crazy. Wayne watched how that chaos made people react and realized he was learning something valuable about getting under people's skin. These partnerships taught him how wrestling worked as a business. You had to be reliable, show up on time, and work well with other people. You couldn't be a prima donna because there were always 10 other guys waiting to take your spot. Working different territories also meant dealing with different types of crowds and different expectations. What worked in Memphis might not work in Florida or Georgia. Wayne was learning to adapt his character and his approach based on where he was wrestling and who was in the audience. Early on, Wayne wrestled as Punk Rock Wayne, but that character wasn't really connecting with audiences. After feuding with Austin Idol, he started retooling his look and experimenting with different approaches. The Memphis territory was where he really started developing his Elvis-inspired character. Memphis was Elvis Presley's home turf, so doing an Elvis gimmick there was either going to work really well or backfire completely. Wayne figured out how to walk that line. He wasn't trying to be a tribute act or honor Elvis's memory. Instead, he was creating this annoying, arrogant version that Memphis fans would want to see get beaten up. Memphis taught him timing and microphone work better than anywhere else. He was learning how to use his voice and mannerisms to get under people's skin. Wayne discovered that timing was everything when it came to getting heat from crowds. You had to know when to talk, when to shut up, and how to read the room. Memphis taught him that wrestling wasn't really about the moves you did in the ring. It was about the story you told and how you made people feel. The crowds in Memphis were teaching Wayne valuable lessons about crowd psychology. He was figuring out exactly what buttons to push to make people react. Sometimes it was something he said on the microphone. Sometimes it was the way he walked to the ring or how he acted during the match. Wayne was becoming a student of what made wrestling fans tick. Jerry Lawler's promotion was also where Wayne learned about the business side of wrestling. He saw how promoters built storylines, how they created stars, and how they kept fans coming back week after week. This wasn't just about having good matches, it was about creating characters people cared about, even if they hated them. By the time Wayne was ready to move on from the territories, he'd figured out something that would make him a lot of money. He understood that being the guy everyone loved to hate was actually more valuable than being just another good guy that fans forgot about. He could work a crowd, get them invested in seeing him lose, and make them pay money to watch it happen. Wayne had mastered the art of being genuinely annoying without being boring. He could make fans angry in exactly the right way. Angry enough to boo him loudly, but entertained enough to keep watching. All these skills were about to get put to the ultimate test when he caught the attention of the biggest wrestling company in the world. When Hulk Hogan recommended Wayne to Vince McMahon, the WWF brought him in during the fall of 1986 with big plans. McMahon's company was expanding nationally, and they needed colorful characters that could connect with audiences from New York to California. McMahon looked at Wayne and saw this guy with the Elvis thing already worked out from his territory days. Perfect, right? Let's make him a good guy Elvis impersonator that families will love. The WWF was really pushing these larger-than-life characters at the time. You had Hulk Hogan as the all-American hero, Andre the Giant as this unstoppable force, and they wanted Wayne to fit into that same mold as the rock and roll good guy. They figured fans would eat up this clean-cut Elvis tribute act. Kids would love the music, parents would appreciate the wholesome entertainment, and everyone would cheer when he came out to the ring. Here's where things went completely wrong. When Wayne would make his entrance as this squeaky-clean Elvis wannabe, the crowds would just sit there. We're talking about complete silence from audiences who were supposed to be cheering. In wrestling, getting no reaction is way worse than getting booed. At least when fans boo, they care about what's happening. When they sit on their hands and don't react at all, that means you're boring them to death. The WWF put Wayne in matches with established stars, hoping some of their popularity would rub off on him. They gave him interview time on television so fans could get to know his personality. But the most telling moment came when they staged a fan mail vote with Jesse Ventura to see whether Honky should be a babyface. The fans rejected him completely. Nothing worked. Fans would watch other wrestlers and get excited, then Wayne would come out and the energy would just die. Meanwhile, Wayne is backstage watching guys like Randy Savage, Jake Roberts, and other performers get massive reactions from the same crowds that ignore him completely. He's seeing how fans respond to different characters and wondering what he's doing wrong. This had to be frustrating for a guy who knew he could work crowds based on his territory experience. But the good guy Elvis act just wasn't connecting with WWF audiences. The company was starting to get impatient with Wayne's lack of progress. In the WWF, you either got over with fans or you got released. There wasn't much middle ground, especially for newer guys who hadn't proven themselves yet. Wayne knew his job was on the line and he needed to figure out something fast. The writing was on the wall. Either this character started working soon or he'd be looking for work somewhere else. Wayne was probably thinking about all those years in the territories where he'd learned how to get heat from crowds. He knew how to make fans react, but the WWF had him playing against his natural strengths. Instead of being the annoying villain that fans wanted to see get beaten up, he was trying to be the hero that fans were supposed to cheer for. It wasn't working because that's not who Wayne really was as a performer. Then somebody backstage came up with an idea that seemed crazy but might just work. What if they took everything about Wayne's character and flipped it completely upside down? Instead of the humble, respectful Elvis tribute act, what if he became an arrogant, obnoxious Elvis wannabe that fans would pay money to see get destroyed? What if they stopped trying to make fans love this guy and started trying to make them hate his guts? The kids weren't into it, but why? We'll show how a simple pivot turned this failure into a cash machine. Wayne had spent years in the territories learning how to be hated, and now the company was finally going to let him use those skills. But making that transformation work would require more than just telling him to be mean. The WWF needed to build this transformation from the ground up, and that's where Jimmy Hart came into the picture. Hart was already established as one of wrestling's best managers, and he had this ability to make any wrestler more annoying just by standing next to them. When they paired Hart with Wayne, something just clicked. Jimmy Hart brought this high-pitched voice and non-stop talking that drove fans absolutely crazy. His constant interference and commentary from ringside were key to building heat for his wrestlers. Hart knew when to interrupt matches, when to distract referees, and how to make crowds want to see his guy get beaten up. Wayne finally had someone in his corner who understood the psychology of being hated. The key was making sure this wasn't just another generic bad guy character. Wrestling was full of guys who were mean for the sake of being mean. Wayne and Hart had to create something that would make fans genuinely angry but still keep them entertained enough to buy tickets. They needed people to hate the Honky Tonk Man but still want to watch what he did next. So they took Wayne's Elvis-inspired character and turned it into an arrogant parody. The Honky Tonk Man became this obnoxious guy who thought he was better than Elvis ever was, complete with that arrogant lip curl, terrible singing and guitar playing, and constant bragging about being the greatest entertainer who ever lived. Fans immediately wanted to see him get his mouth shut for him. The character really started taking shape when they added storylines that gave fans more reasons to hate him. The Peggy Sue angle was perfect for this. Sherry Martel in disguise created this annoying soap opera that made the Honky Tonk Man look like even more of a jerk. Fans didn't want to see this guy get the girl. They wanted to see him get destroyed. Then the WWF started putting him in feuds with wrestlers that fans actually liked. His program with Jake Roberts was genius because Roberts was this cool, mysterious character that crowds respected. The turning point came during a snake pit segment where Honky attacked Jake Roberts with a guitar, cementing his malicious persona. When you put the Honky Tonk Man next to someone like Roberts, the contrast made Honky look even more annoying. Fans would see Roberts being serious and intense, then here comes this ridiculous Elvis wannabe acting like he's hot stuff. Wayne was learning how to be obnoxious in exactly the right way. He couldn't be so annoying that fans would change the channel or leave the building. But he had to be irritating enough that they'd pay money to see someone beat him up. That's a really thin line to walk, and Wayne was getting better at it every week. His whole guitar-smashing routine became this signature move that fans loved to hate. He'd bring out this cheap guitar, play some terrible music, then smash the thing over someone's head. It was cheesy and over the top, but that was exactly what made it work. Fans knew it was ridiculous, but they still got mad when he did it because that was the whole point. The bragging was another key element that made the character work. The Honky Tonk Man would come out every week and tell everyone how great he was, how he was the greatest entertainer in the world, and how all the other wrestlers were jealous of him. This kind of arrogance made fans want to see him proved wrong. They wanted someone to shut this guy up and show him he wasn't as good as he thought he was. By early 1987, everything was coming together for this character. The Honky Tonk Man was getting legitimate heat from crowds all across the country. When he'd come out to the ring, fans would boo immediately and they'd stay mad throughout his entire match. That's exactly what the WWF wanted, a villain that fans would pay to see lose. WrestleMania 3 was really the moment when you could see that this character had hit its stride. The crowd reaction was perfect. They hated the Honky Tonk Man, but they were completely engaged in what was happening. Wayne had finally found his place in the WWF as this perfectly annoying villain that fans couldn't ignore. The character was ready for something bigger than just regular matches and storylines. The Honky Tonk Man had become the kind of wrestler that fans would pay to see get beaten, which meant he was valuable to the company. But nobody could have predicted just how valuable he was about to become when the WWF decided to put their most prestigious secondary championship around his waist. June 2nd, 1987, at the big event in Buffalo, was supposed to be just another night where Ricky Steamboat proved why he was the perfect Intercontinental Champion. Steamboat was everything you wanted in a champion back then. The guy could wrestle circles around pretty much anyone on the roster. He had this natural athletic ability that made even basic moves look incredible. And fans genuinely respected him as a performer. Steamboat had won the title from Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3 in what many people still consider one of the greatest matches ever. He was exactly the kind of champion the WWF wanted, representing their second most important title. Technical skills, good looks, great personality, and he could have a great match with just about anybody. When fans paid to see Steamboat defend the title, they knew they were getting their money's worth. But behind the scenes, things were changing fast. Steamboat had requested paternity leave to spend time with his newborn son, which meant the WWF needed to get the title off him quickly. The original plan was to use Butch Reed as a transitional champion, but Reed's prospects had faltered and the company needed a different solution. That's when they decided to insert the Honky Tonk Man as the replacement champion. Even though nobody expected it to work, absolutely nobody walking into that arena expected to see the title change hands that night. This wasn't one of those shows where you could sense something big was going to happen. The Honky Tonk Man was still being treated like this annoying character who might steal a win here and there, but he wasn't seen as championship material by the fans or most of the wrestling media. Keep in mind that in 1987, the Intercontinental Championship still meant something serious. This wasn't a belt you gave to comedy characters or guys who couldn't really wrestle. The title had a history of being held by legitimate athletes and skilled performers. Fans expected the champion to be someone who could back up their position with actual wrestling ability. When the match started, it became pretty clear that the Honky Tonk Man wasn't planning to win this thing with superior wrestling skills. Jimmy Hart was at ringside doing everything he could to distract Steamboat and the referee. Honky was using every cheap tactic you could think of: eye pokes, low blows, choking when the referee wasn't looking, and basically anything else that would give him an advantage. The crowd was getting more and more frustrated as the match went on because they could see what was happening. Steamboat was clearly the better wrestler, but he kept getting screwed over by all the interference and dirty tactics. Fans were waiting for justice to prevail and for Steamboat to overcome all the cheating with his superior ability. Then came the finish that shocked everyone in that building. The Honky Tonk Man grabbed the ropes for extra leverage out of the referee's view to secure the pin, and he counted to 3. Just like that, this cartoon character who'd been getting booed out of buildings for months was suddenly the new Intercontinental Champion. The crowd reaction was unlike anything you'd typically hear at a wrestling show. These weren't the usual boos you get when the bad guy does something mean. This was genuine outrage from fans who felt like they'd just witnessed something that shouldn't have been allowed to happen. People were screaming, throwing garbage into the ring, and making so much noise that you couldn't hear the announcers trying to call what had just happened. The outrage wasn't just theatrics. Fans actually trashed the ring and stormed the moment, setting up months of pay-per-viewable rage. You could see people in the crowd who looked genuinely angry, not just playing along with the show. This wasn't the typical wrestling crowd reaction. This felt real. Even the wrestlers backstage were shocked by what they'd just seen. This was the kind of title change that just didn't happen in the WWF. Champions were supposed to be credible athletes who could defend their titles with skill and determination. The idea that someone like the Honky Tonk Man could beat someone like Ricky Steamboat for a major championship seemed impossible. But here's why this upset worked so perfectly from a business standpoint. Fans weren't just disappointed, they were genuinely outraged, and they wanted immediate payback. They wanted to see the Honky Tonk Man lose that title as soon as possible, preferably in the most humiliating way possible. The WWF had just created a situation where fans would pay money to see this guy get beaten up. What those angry fans in Buffalo didn't realize that night was that their desire to see quick justice wasn't going to be satisfied anytime soon. The Honky Tonk Man was about to completely rewrite the rules of what it meant to be a champion. Once he had that belt, Honky completely flipped the script on what it meant to be a fighting champion. Most title holders want to prove they deserve the belt by going out there and beating every challenger that comes their way. They take pride in defending their championship and showing fans why they're the best. Honky did the complete opposite of that approach. His strategy was simple but incredibly effective. Instead of trying to beat his challengers in clean, decisive matches, he would find creative ways to keep the title without actually proving he was better than anyone. The guy turned getting disqualified into an art form. He'd throw a punch in front of the referee, use a foreign object when the official was looking, or do something else that would get him disqualified but let him keep the championship. Getting counted out became another favorite tactic. When things weren't going his way in a match, Honky would just leave the ring and walk back toward the locker room. Jimmy Hart would be right there, encouraging him to take the easy way out. Sure, he'd lose the match, but champions don't lose their titles on countouts, so he'd still walk away with the belt. Jimmy Hart's interference was probably the most frustrating part for fans who wanted to see a fair fight. Hart would grab the challenger's leg from outside the ring, distract the referee at crucial moments, or slide weapons into the ring when nobody was looking. every single title defense had some kind of outside interference that prevented a clean finish. These tactics worked against everyone who challenged him. In rematches with Steamboat, Billy Jack Haynes, and George the Animal Steele, the same pattern would repeat itself. Honky would avoid clean defeats through disqualifications, countouts, and manager interference. Fans were losing their minds over this stuff because they desperately wanted to see someone shut this guy up. His feud with Randy Savage was built entirely around this formula. Savage was this intense, athletic performer who should have been able to destroy the Honky Tonk Man in a straight wrestling match. But every time they faced off, something would go wrong. Hart would interfere, Honky would get himself disqualified, or some other nonsense would happen that prevented Savage from getting a clean victory. The same thing happened with Brutus Beefcake. Here's a guy who was popular with fans and had legitimate wrestling skills, but he couldn't get a clean win over the champion either. Match after match, Beefcake would dominate most of the action, only to get screwed over by interference or dirty tactics, right when it looked like he had the match won. Jake Roberts dealt with the same frustrating pattern during his program with Honky. Roberts had this cool, calculated style that fans loved, and he should have been able to out-wrestle the champion easily. But every single match would end with some kind of screwy finish that left Roberts looking strong, but still without the title. The more this pattern continued, the angrier crowds became, and that was exactly what the WWF wanted. Fans weren't just booing the Honky Tonk Man anymore, they were genuinely furious with him. They wanted justice, and they were willing to pay money to see it happen. Every week on WWF television, Honky would come out with that championship belt and brag about being the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. He'd talk about how he was better than all the previous champions and how nobody could take the title away from him. The crowds would boo louder and louder, but that just encouraged him to keep talking. This whole strategy was making serious money for the WWF. Frustrated fans bought tickets and pay-per-views, specifically hoping for the payoff of finally seeing the Honky Tonk Man lose that title. They'd pack arenas because they thought this might be the night justice would finally be served. The company was basically printing money off people's desire to see this guy get beaten up. The strategy worked so well that the WWF kept extending his reign longer and longer. What was supposed to be a short-term heel championship run turned into this record-breaking reign that nobody saw coming. Honky was holding that title for so long that he was breaking records that had stood for years. But while this approach was generating money and crowd heat, it was also creating problems that the WWF hadn't anticipated. The success of Honky's reign was starting to cause serious tension behind the scenes. Other wrestlers in the locker room were developing some real problems with Wayne Farris, and this wasn't the fun kind of heat you want as a heel character. This was legitimate frustration from performers who felt like their careers were being held back by a guy who couldn't wrestle his way out of a paper bag. The main issue was pretty simple to understand. Here you had all these talented wrestlers on the roster who could put on incredible matches and really showcase what professional wrestling could be. Guys who had spent years perfecting their craft and building their reputations. Then you had the Honky Tonk Man holding the company's second most important championship for month after month, and he was doing it without having to prove he deserved it. Some of the boys in the back started grumbling about how this whole situation was working. They'd see Wayne walking around with that Intercontinental Championship, and they knew damn well he hadn't earned it through superior wrestling ability. Meanwhile, guys who could actually work were stuck in lower positions on the card because the title was tied up in this comedy act that seemed to go on forever. The rumors started flying pretty quickly, and Honky later corroborated elements in interviews. That he pushed back on losing the title on big TV, leveraging the threat of moving to WCW, which gave him real negotiating power. The most significant incident allegedly involved him refusing to lose the belt on the main event. A huge TV audience that could have reshaped his entire reign. His defiance reportedly affected booking plans, with Randy Savage not regaining the belt as originally planned, and other wrestlers like Ted DiBiase having their storylines adjusted around Honky's political maneuvering. You have to understand that wrestlers take pride in their profession, even if they're playing characters and following scripts. Most of these guys grew up watching wrestling and dreaming about holding championships someday. When they see someone who they don't think can really wrestle holding a major title for over a year, it creates genuine locker room resentment. The backstage complaints weren't just coming from lower card guys who were jealous of Wayne's position. Some of the established stars were questioning whether this whole thing was diminishing the prestige of the Intercontinental Championship itself. Wrestling has always walked this line between entertainment and athletic competition, and some wrestlers felt like Wayne's reign was pushing things too far toward pure entertainment. Management found themselves in a really tough spot with this whole situation. On one hand, the Honky Tonk Man was clearly drawing money for the company. Fans were buying tickets specifically to see him get beaten up, and that's exactly what you want from a heel character. The business side of things was working perfectly, but on the other hand, they had a locker room full of talent that was getting restless about the situation. Vince McMahon and the WWF brass had to balance keeping their performers happy with making money from this character that fans loved to hate. They couldn't just ignore the backstage complaints because unhappy wrestlers can cause all kinds of problems. But they also couldn't throw away a character that was generating real heat and selling tickets. Some of the veteran wrestlers started talking about how this was affecting the championship's legacy. The belt had a history of being held by guys like Pedro Morales, Pat Patterson, and other wrestlers who were respected for their in-ring abilities. Having someone like the Honky Tonk Man hold it for so long was changing how people viewed the title. The tension kept building as Wayne's reign stretched on longer and longer. What started as mild grumbling from a few wrestlers turned into a more widespread feeling that something needed to change. The locker room atmosphere was getting uncomfortable, and that's never good for business in the long run. By mid-1988, it was pretty clear that the World Wildlife Fund couldn't let this situation continue indefinitely. They'd made their money off the Honky Tonk Man's heel championship run, but the backstage heat was becoming a real problem. They needed to find a way to end his reign that would satisfy both the fans who wanted to see him lose and the wrestlers who wanted to see the title go to someone more deserving. The company was working on a plan that would solve all these problems at once, and it was going to happen at their biggest summer event. SummerSlam 1988 rolls around, and everyone walking into Madison Square Garden that night figured they knew exactly what was going to happen. The Honky Tonk Man would defend his Intercontinental Championship against Brutus Beefcake. There'd be some kind of screwy finish involving Jimmy Hart, and fans would go home frustrated once again. That's how it had worked for the past 454 days, so why would this night be any different? The crowd was already prepared for disappointment before the match even started. They'd seen this movie too many times before. Honky would find some way to escape with his title intact, probably through a disqualification or countout, and fans would have to wait until the next show to see if maybe this time would be different. It was getting old, but people kept showing up because they desperately wanted to see this guy finally lose. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Brutus Beefcake had been attacked backstage by Ron Bass and couldn't compete. The Honky Tonk Man would face a mystery opponent instead. Now fans are thinking maybe this is their chance to finally see some justice. Maybe the WWF brought in someone who could actually beat this guy and end this nightmare reign that had gone on way too long. Out comes the Ultimate Warrior, and the crowd absolutely loses their minds. This guy looks like he was built in a laboratory specifically to destroy other human beings. Warrior had this incredible physique with muscles on top of muscles, and he moved with this intense energy that made him look like a superhero come to life. If there was ever a wrestler who looked capable of destroying the Honky Tonk Man in seconds, it was this guy. The Warrior charges down to the ring like a man possessed, and you can see the Honky Tonk Man's face change immediately. For 454 days, he'd been dealing with wrestlers who would wrestle him in traditional matches where he could use his usual tricks. But Warrior wasn't interested in having a wrestling match. He was there to completely annihilate the champion. What happened next was the most one-sided destruction in championship match history. Warrior hit the ring and immediately started throwing Honky around like he was a small child. The Warrior grabbed Honky, pressed him over his head like he weighed nothing, and slammed him down with authority. Then came the Gorilla Press Slam that basically ended 454 days of frustration in one move. Warrior picked up the Honky Tonk Man, pressed him high above his head, and dropped him to the mat with tremendous force. Honky hit the canvas and looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Warrior followed up with his big splash finisher, and that was all she wrote. The referee counted 1, 2, 3, and just like that, the longest Intercontinental Championship reign in history was over. The whole thing took about 31 seconds from start to finish. Fans had been waiting over a year to see the Honky Tonk Man get destroyed, and Warrior delivered exactly what they wanted in record time. The decisive squash served to vault Warrior into the main event scene while decisively ending Honky's stalling reign. Jimmy Hart was running around ringside looking completely shocked by what had just happened. For more than a year, he'd been able to help his guy escape from every bad situation through interference or dirty tactics. But there was nothing he could do against the Ultimate Warrior's raw power and intensity. All his usual tricks were useless when faced with someone who could end a match in 30 seconds. The Honky Tonk Man went from record-setting champion to unconscious loser faster than most people could process what was happening. After 454 days of cheap victories and cowardly escapes, he'd been completely destroyed by someone who didn't care about his games or his tricks. That squash match perfectly captured what wrestling fans had been craving for over a year. Someone finally shut the Honky Tonk Man up in the most brutal way possible. But losing that title was just the beginning of Wayne's problems, not the end of them. The championship was gone, but Wayne still had to figure out how to make a living in wrestling. For over a year, he'd been the guy everyone wanted to see lose, which made him valuable to the company. Now he was just another wrestler on the roster, and that's not nearly as special as being the most hated champion in the business. Without the Intercontinental Championship, Honky's whole character lost most of what made it work. The bragging about being the greatest champion of all time didn't make sense anymore. The cowardly tactics that frustrated fans for 454 days weren't as interesting when there wasn't a title on the line. The WWF had built this character around him being an undeserving champion, and once that championship was gone, they had to figure out what to do with him next. The company tried to keep him relevant by putting him in a tag team called Rhythm and Blues with Greg Valentine. They gave them this whole rock and roll gimmick, complete with matching outfits and musical instruments. Valentine played the guitar while Honky handled the singing, and they rode around in this pink Cadillac that was supposed to make them look like big shots. Honky would even sing live at some events, which added to the whole musical act they were trying to create. Rhythm and Blues had some decent matches and got reasonable crowd reactions, but it was clear this wasn't going to recapture the magic of Honky's championship run. Tag teams are different from singles wrestlers because the heat gets split between two people. When Honky was champion, all the fan hatred was focused on him personally. Now he had to share that attention with Valentine, and it diluted what made his character special in the first place. The pink Cadillac and rock and roll act started feeling more like a cartoon than a serious wrestling storyline. Fans would boo when Rhythm and Blues came out, but it wasn't the same intense hatred that Honky generated as champion. People weren't buying tickets specifically to see this tag team get beaten up the way they did when Honky held the Intercontinental title. By the time WrestleMania 6 rolled around in 1990, it was obvious that the Honky Tonk Man was moving down the card instead of up. He went from being in main event storylines to working in the middle of the show. The WWF eventually moved him into a color commentary role, which was basically wrestling's way of putting older performers out to pasture. Wayne left the WWF in January 1991 due to contract disputes, and his wrestling career took a different direction from there. He leaned into the persona when he returned to WCW in 1994, where they reused the same character presentation that had worked years earlier. On the independent circuit, he sold out nostalgia shows and conventions, cashing in on his infamy from that record-breaking championship reign. His later work in WCW felt more like a victory lap than a serious attempt at rebuilding his career. WCW brought him in because of his name recognition from the WWF, but they never really figured out how to use him effectively. The fans who remembered his championship run would pop when he showed up, but the character never recaptured what made it special in the first place. He even returned to the WWF briefly in 1997, working as a commentator and manager, but that stint didn't last long either. The independent wrestling circuit became his main source of income after the major promotions were done with him. These smaller shows would book the Honky Tonk Man because his name still drew fans who remembered the good old days. Instead of trying to reinvent himself as a serious wrestler or develop new characters, Wayne decided to embrace his infamy and make money off being controversial. He'd show up at wrestling conventions, do interviews about his championship reign, and basically cash in on being one of wrestling's most memorable villains. Next up, Bobby Heenan.
Bobby Heenan, the kingmaker of many wrestling legends. Andre the Giant, Paul Orndorff, Mr. Perfect, and many more. Not content with just managing champions, he stepped into the broadcast booth where his commentary with Gorilla Monsoon would redefine wrestling broadcasting forever. But in 2002, Bobby would face his toughest opponent. And this time, it didn't just end his career, it tragically ended his life. But before we get into that, let's first take it back to November 1st, 1944, where Raymond Lewis Heenan was born. Wrestling was in Bobby's blood from the start. Splitting his youth between the gritty streets of Chicago and Indianapolis, he found his way into the business at just 17, doing whatever jobs he could find at local shows. From carrying wrestlers' bags to selling refreshments, young Bobby was learning the business from the ground up. From 1961 to 1974, Heenan worked for the World Wrestling Association. He did both wrestling and managing. During this time, he became famous for working with a team called the Blackjacks. People say he's the reason why Blackjack Lanza became one of the most hated wrestlers of that time. In 1974, Heenan left his job because of a fight about money and went to work for a different wrestling company called AWA. Some really important things happened there that would stay with him forever. This is where he started calling himself Bobby the Brain, and where other wrestlers started making fun of him by calling him Weasel. While working for AWA, Heenan helped two wrestlers, Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, become tag team champions. He also created his first group of wrestlers that he managed, called the Heenan family. This group included Bockwinkel, Stevens, Blackjack Lanza, and Bobby Duncombe Jr. In 1970, Heenan went to work for Georgia Championship Wrestling. There, he met a young wrestler named Hulk Hogan. Heenan saw something special in Hogan and called Vern Gagne at AWA, telling him to hire Hogan right away. Heenan knew Hogan would become a huge star, and he was absolutely right. Heenan stayed in Georgia less than a year before going back to AWA. His boss, Ole Anderson, had fired him even though he'd promised Heenan a job for life. This was especially tough because Heenan had moved his whole family there based on that promise. Back at AWA, Heenan kept managing Nick Bockwinkel, who was now fighting against the same Hulk Hogan that Heenan had discovered. In 1983, Heenan badly hurt his neck during a wrestling tour in Japan. He couldn't get surgery until 1995 because he didn't have health insurance before then. This injury made it hard for him to wrestle for the rest of his career. In 1984, Heenan joined WWF, where he would become most famous. He started by helping Big John Studd in his fight against Andre the Giant, even standing in Studd's corner during the very first WrestleMania. Soon after, Heenan created a new version of his wrestling group, the Heenan family. This group grew to include many famous wrestlers like Rick Rude, Andre the Giant, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, King Kong Bundy, Paul Orndorff, Bode Rose, Mr. Perfect, and Harley Race. If you were a bad guy wrestler in WWF, you wanted Heenan speaking for you. In the mid-1980s, Heenan and his group had a big rivalry with champion Hulk Hogan. Heenan helped two of his wrestlers, King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant, fight against Hogan at WrestleMania 2 and 3. Though Heenan was mainly a manager in WWF, he did wrestle sometimes. His biggest win came at WrestleMania 4, where he and the Islanders beat the British Bulldogs and Koko B. Ware. The next year at WrestleMania 5, he lost a quick 30-second match to the Red Rooster. He also had several matches with the Ultimate Warrior, where the loser had to wear a weasel costume. Heenan usually ended up being the one forced to wear it. Heenan and Ultimate Warrior strongly disliked each other. At WrestleMania 5, Warrior slammed Heenan hard and really hurt him. Heenan thought Warrior was dangerous in the ring. Years later, Warrior made some terrible comments about Heenan that were so bad, I won't repeat them here. Today's WWE seems to have forgotten about all the awful things Warrior said back then. In 1991, Heenan stopped being a manager, but he came back when Ric Flair joined WWF. Out of all the wrestlers Heenan worked with, Flair was probably his best partner, with Rick Rude coming in second. When Flair first came to WWF, Heenan did an amazing job making him look like a real world champion. He would never stop talking about how great Flair was, and it worked perfectly. Looking back at his time in WWF, Heenan helped many wrestlers win championships. He helped Mr. Perfect and Rick Rude win the Intercontinental title. He also helped two tag teams, the Brainbusters and the team of Andre the Giant and Haku, become tag team champions. While managing wrestlers, Heenan also started doing TV commentary. Vince McMahon made a smart choice putting Heenan behind the microphone, where his quick wit and big personality could really shine. Heenan wasn't just great at helping his wrestlers cheat and managing his group, he was brilliant at commentary too. He always supported the bad guys and he made it really funny. Kids watching wanted to see someone shut him up, but grown-ups can now look back and see just how funny he really was. Heenan took over from Jesse Ventura on two TV shows, Primetime Wrestling and All-American Wrestling, where he worked with Gorilla Monsoon. Heenan and Monsoon were perfect together. Monsoon was serious and focused on the matches, while Heenan kept making jokes and supporting the bad guys. They just clicked in a way that made everything better. While many think JR and Jerry the King Lawler were the best announcing team ever, Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon were really something special. Fans would watch their shows just to hear them talk, especially since many matches featured unknown wrestlers losing to stars. Heenan had his own special way of talking about everything. He called fans humanoids and made fun of losing wrestlers by calling them ham and eggers. He always cheered when bad guys cheated and criticized the good guys. Whenever he went too far with his jokes, Gorilla would yell, "Will you stop?" at him. Their back-and-forth banter was incredibly fun to watch. You can find a lot of fun shows with Bobby Heenan on WWE Network, especially Primetime Wrestling. He was so good at entertaining people that they even made a show just for him called The Bobby Heenan Show. If you can find episodes online, they're worth watching. After leaving WWF, Heenan went to work for their rival company, WCW. He had actually planned to quit wrestling completely, but WCW offered him health insurance and fewer work days. This was enough to convince him to keep working. His last day in WWF was December 6, 1993, on Raw. The show ended perfectly. Gorilla Monsoon got fed up with Heenan's insults and threw him out of the building. It was a fitting end to their time together, which had made millions of fans laugh. After the show, Heenan and Monsoon went back to their hotel and cried together, thinking about all their good memories. Bobby Heenan joined WCW after leaving WWF, but he faced a sad moment when his friend Gorilla Monsoon died on October 6, 1999. Even though Monsoon never worked for WCW, Heenan demanded they announce his death on their show. On October 11th's WCW Nitro, Heenan and Tony Schiavone told viewers about Monsoon's death, and Heenan said goodbye to his friend. Later, people found out that Schiavone didn't want to mention Monsoon on the show, which made Heenan angry at him. Heenan started at WCW by replacing Jesse Ventura as announcer on WCW Saturday Night, and later became the company's main commentator. When WCW created a new show called Monday Nitro in September 1995 to compete with WWF, Heenan moved there to be part of it. In 1996 at the Great American Bash, Heenan briefly went back to managing when he helped his old friends Ric Flair and Arn Anderson in a match against Steve Mongo McMichael and Kevin Green. Heenan helped trick McMichael into turning against his partner Green, which led to McMichael joining a group called the Four Horsemen. While the Horsemen weren't doing great at this time, it was fun seeing Heenan manage again. Something interesting happened in mid-1996 when Hulk Hogan shocked everyone by becoming a bad guy and joining a group called the NWO. Heenan, who had always said Hogan was no good, suddenly became a good guy on TV. He kept telling fans, "I told you so" about Hogan, reminding everyone that he'd been right about Hogan all along. He loved pointing out on TV that he'd known Hogan's true nature years before anyone else did. When WCW had shows at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally with events called Hog Wild, Heenan reportedly showed up drunk to do commentary. Eric Bischoff knew Heenan would have a few drinks before work, which was more common back then. But the truth was, Heenan, like most of the wrestlers, just didn't fit in with the biker scene. He dealt with it by having a few extra drinks to get through the chaos. Eric Bischoff explained it well. Heenan was used to nice hotels and good restaurants, but at Sturgis, he was stuck in a messy place with 250,000 loud motorcycles running from early morning until late at night. There was nowhere quiet or clean to rest, and it was blazing hot. All this really got to Heenan, who was used to more comfortable surroundings. In January 2000, WCW took Heenan off Monday Nitro and pay-per-views, replacing him with Mark Madden. Though he kept working on their other show, Thunder, for a while, they eventually replaced him there too. By November 2000, WCW had let him go completely. Later, Heenan opened up about his time in WCW, saying he really didn't like working with Tony Schiavone. Their relationship was so bad that Heenan believed Schiavone was the reason Mark Madden took his spot on Nitro. Heenan didn't stay quiet about his time in WCW after leaving. He spoke openly about all his problems with the company in interviews, and he wrote about it in detail in his book. He firmly believed WCW was run the wrong way, and he wasn't afraid to say so. In his own words, Heenan said WCW felt like a zombie city. Nobody talked to each other, and there was no friendship among workers. He believed talented wrestlers like Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Eddie Guerrero never got a real chance because Eric Bischoff preferred using older stars from other companies. Heenan thought most people in WCW didn't know what they were doing. On April 1, 2001, Heenan came back to WWF for one night, joining his old friend Mean Gene Okerlund to announce a special match at WrestleMania 17. Then, in 2002, Bobby Heenan faced what would become his greatest challenge. At a time when he should have been enjoying his retirement from wrestling, doctors discovered cancer at the base of his tongue. This wasn't just a small problem. The cancer had already spread to his lymph nodes, making it even more dangerous. But just like he had taught so many wrestlers to never back down from a fight, Heenan faced this illness with remarkable courage. The treatments he had to go through were incredibly harsh on his body. Doctors performed surgery to remove part of his tongue, which alone would have been traumatic enough. But that was just the beginning. Heenan then had to endure 35 separate radiation treatments. Each session was like fighting a new opponent, slowly wearing down his body and spirit. Think about going through such intense medical procedures not just once or twice, but 35 times. It's almost unimaginable. These medical battles took a heavy toll on the man fans had known and loved. His weight dropped dramatically as the treatments made it difficult to eat. Perhaps most heartbreaking for someone known for his quick wit and sharp tongue, the treatments changed his voice. That unmistakable instrument that had entertained millions was now different. This would have been enough to break many people's spirits, but not Bobby Heenan's. Instead of hiding away from the public eye, Heenan continued to make appearances whenever he could. Even when his hair fell out from the treatments, he simply put on a bandana and kept going. In 2004, WWE honored Heenan by putting him in their Hall of Fame. His acceptance speech was very emotional. It can bring tears to the eyes of tough guys and really means a lot to fans who grew up watching him. It's worth finding and watching if you can. Heenan stayed connected to wrestling by helping induct several of his former wrestlers into the WWE Hall of Fame: Paul Orndorff, the Blackjacks, and Nick Bockwinkel. By 2004, his cancer went into remission, but the treatments had changed him a lot. He lost a lot of weight, and his voice wasn't the same anymore. In December 2009, he ended up back in the hospital. Another infection had developed in his jaw, requiring more medical treatment. It seemed like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. As much as he fought, his body was getting tired from the constant medical battles. But an even more challenging period was about to begin. By 2010, years of fighting cancer, enduring surgeries, and battling infections had taken a heavy toll on Heenan's body. He started having serious problems with balance and strength, leading to a series of devastating falls. The first major fall happened at his home in 2010, and it was severe. He broke his hip, shoulder, and pelvis all at once. For someone already dealing with so many health issues, these injuries were especially dangerous. Just when he was starting to recover from these injuries, tragedy struck again in 2014, when another fall left him with a broken shoulder. His body, once strong enough to stand toe-to-toe with wrestling's biggest stars, was now betraying him. The worst came in 2016 when he fell once more, breaking his hip for the second time. Each fall seemed to take away more of his independence and strength. For his family, watching this happen was heart-wrenching. The man who had always been larger than life, who could command attention just by walking into a room, was now struggling with basic movement. These falls weren't just breaking bones, they were slowly breaking the spirit of one of wrestling's most resilient personalities. On September 17, 2017, Bobby Heenan passed away at age 72 when his organs failed. WWE announcer Jim Ross was the first to tell the world about Heenan's death, sharing the news on Twitter. Throughout his final years, even as health problems tried to slow him down, Bobby Heenan kept connecting with the fans who loved him. He traveled to wrestling conventions and fan events whenever he could, sharing stories and making people laugh just like he always had. He even found the strength to write 2 books, giving fans a deeper look into his amazing career and the countless memories he'd made along the way. When people think about Bobby the Brain Heenan today, they remember someone who could do it all. He wasn't just a great manager, though he was definitely that. He wasn't just a brilliant commentator, though he set the standard for everyone who came after. He was something special, a one-of-a-kind personality who could make you angry one minute and laugh out loud the next. Even when fans were booing him at the top of their lungs, they secretly loved every minute of it. Bobby Heenan's life story is like a roller coaster, filled with incredible achievements and painful struggles. From the highest points of his career, managing legendary wrestlers, creating unforgettable moments on commentary, being inducted into the Hall of Fame, to the lowest valleys of his health battles, he faced everything with remarkable spirit. His influence on professional wrestling can still be felt today, decades after his prime. The way Heenan handled both success and hardship teaches us something important about life. He showed us that it's possible to keep your sense of humor even when things get tough, to stay strong even when your body is weak, and to keep fighting even when the odds are against you. His story isn't just about wrestling. It's about facing life's challenges with courage and character. Bobby Heenan may no longer be with us, but his legacy lives on in every witty comment from a wrestling commentator, in every manager trying to talk their way out of trouble, and in the memories of millions of fans who either loved him or loved to hate him. He proved that sometimes the greatest victories in life don't happen in a wrestling ring, but in how we face our daily battles with dignity and determination.